Today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Anne Wahlgren from Printable Parents. Anne is a reading specialist and a dyslexia specialist who has her master's degree in education, and she's also been trained in Orton-Gillingham. Anne works as a reading specialist in a school. She works with kindergarten students. She also has her own tutoring business where she is working one on one with struggling readers, especially those with dyslexia. Anne has experience in her professional life working with struggling readers, but she also has experience in her personal life as her oldest daughter is diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. Anne knows what it's like to have a child who struggles. She knows how hard it is for the parent when your child is struggling with reading. She also knows how hard it is for the child and how that can really impact their confidence and their mental health. That's why her platform is all about empowering parents to work with their kids at home, making sure that they are working with their kids as young as preschool, especially in kindergarten, watching to make sure that their child's reading development is happening at an appropriate level. And so, if there are struggles or concerns, that you as the parent can get help for your child right away, because we know that early intervention is key. Anne has seen that with her daughter. She was able to get her help right away, and now she's thriving. And she wants that for you as well. If you are a parent of a struggling reader, you can absolutely reach out to her and she would be happy to support you. She has wonderful programs. She has a course that you can enroll in that will teach you how to teach your child to read, especially if they're struggling. And she also has really fun printable activities and games so that working with your child at home is no longer a battle, but it is fun and engaging, and your child will have no idea how much they're learning because they're having so much fun. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Anne, and I'm excited for you to hear her story. Hey, Anne, welcome to the Little Love Learning Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
All right. Well, you and I connected online, and I'm so excited for the listeners to get to know you because I think they are going to fall in love with you just like I did. You have
Oh, thank you.
so much to share, so much information, and a personal story as well. So, I would love
Yeah.
to start at the beginning with kind of how you got into education and how you became a teacher because your background is filled with lots of amazing schools and lots of
Yeah.
amazing education.
Okay, so I grew up in a family of teachers. That's the simplest way to say how I became a teacher. My mom taught at the school that I went to growing up, but I had aunts and uncles who were teachers. My oldest sister is 10 years older than me. So when I was in middle school, she was already special education teacher. So I just grew up in schools and loved schools. I was the kid who rode the bus to my mom's school after school when I was in high school, and I would work in her classroom. So I was just drawn to it. When I was in college, I needed my job to help me work through college, and I ended up working at the after school program at the neighborhood school and just found my way. I didn't get my undergrad in teaching because I think I was a little bit in denial in college that I wanted to be a teacher, but by the end of my junior year, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I went ahead, and after I graduated from college, I taught without a certificate for a year. I taught pre-K through eighth grade Spanish, which I was in a private school. I was in a Catholic school, and you didn't really need a teaching certificate to do that. Then I went ahead and got my master's degree in education, and I taught in an inner city school in downtown Los Angeles. I taught 100% immigrant children, and that is really where my love of literacy came in, because I had these kids whose parents were just breaking their backs to provide for them, to give them a better life, and I didn't know how to teach them to read. They were fifth graders, not reading anywhere near grade level. And yet, like so many of us educators, what I was getting when I was doing my master's degree at the same time was this balanced literacy approach, which I now know, just not knowing how to teach these kids how to read. Fast forward a couple years, I moved home to the Seattle area, and I had an amazing principal. I was in second grade at that point. I had an amazing principal who got us all Orton-Gillingham to training. The approach that we learned is Slingerland. It's a brand, kind of. I would call it a brand of Orton-Gillingham, and that was in the mid 2000s. So once I got that structured literacy training, I was like, why have we not all been doing this all along? Because I had a plan now. I knew why children weren't reading. I had a plan to how to teach all of the children in my class to read. So that's a little bit about like how I became a teacher and my love of literacy. But part of I know what you wanted to talk about is why am I doing what I'm doing now? And it's really because of my children.
Yes, you have such a great background as a teacher. So you're coming to this from a professional standpoint. wanting to
Yeah.
help kids, seeing them struggle in the classroom. I agree with you. When I went through my
Mm.
Orton-Gillingham training, it was just like light bulbs going off all over the place,
Yeah.
things that I didn't learn in my undergrad or master's program. But
Right.
you also have a personal connection to this importance of literacy, especially early literacy and early
Yep.
intervention. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, so right now I am a reading specialist in a Catholic school for kindergarten through second grade. I have my website, and I do dyslexia tutoring, but my most important job is being mom to my three kids. And my oldest child, my daughter Molly, when Molly's autistic. So when Molly was about 2, we started seeing some of the signs. It's hard to get a girl diagnosed. It took us until about 4.5 to get her an autism diagnosis. So we went into public school. At that point, because I'd had the structured literacy training, I just kind of assumed that everybody did at that point, that we knew now how to teach kids to read. Everybody was doing it. Molly did okay. She did okay in kindergarten. She didn't have any classic early dyslexia signs. But by the time the pandemic rolled around and I saw what she was doing, I saw what she was being taught, and I saw what she couldn't do at home with me, that's when I started thinking, actually, I remember I walked upstairs to my husband. We were down here at this table behind us, and I walked upstairs to my husband who was working from home and said, Kyle, Molly has a learning disability too. I didn't initially suspect dyslexia. I just initially suspected dysgraphia because she couldn't spell the word pet. So now I realize we had memorized a ton of words. So she was looking okay in kindergarten, first grade, and we were using leveled readers. So it was looking okay, but we couldn't spell pet at the end of first grade in the pandemic. And I was like, this is not right. Because I mean, you and I know that kindergartners by this point in the school year, by March when we shut down in the pandemic, that they should be able to spell CBC words like that with no problem. So that was one of the first big signs. And we ended up getting her in second grade privately evaluated because the, we had a ton of fights with the school district that we can do another episodes about that about advocating with the school district. But we got her privately evaluated, and she was diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia in addition to the autism. So any parent out there who's listening to Erin today, and if you have a child who has another developmental disability, just be aware your kid can have a learning disability too. And a lot of professionals don't seem to realize your child really can have two things going on at the same time.
Right, and for you to be so aware and to be able to recognize that in her and get her the help that
Mhm.
she needed early on is so
Mhm.
important and so key. She's very
Really,
lucky that
yeah,
you were
yeah.
there, and I also wonder if it hadn't been the pandemic and she had just been in school, if you would have recognized it as quickly as you did.
I don't think we would have, because what we were hearing, and this is another really important takeaway for parents, what we were hearing about was behavior. And a lot of times teachers don't understand, to no fault of their own, because we just don't get enough training. A lot of times teachers don't understand that behavior sometimes isn't just behavior, it's actually learning issues in disguise, because a lot of kids would rather be the bad kid instead of the dumb kid in class. So I think we would have gone through first grade and second grade and just been addressing behavior, because I wasn't seeing, they didn't assign homework. I wasn't seeing stuff come home, and I had 2 other little kids, so I was not doing a lot of work with her at home just because of the nature of what I was juggling at the time. So yeah, it would have definitely taken her longer, and we're just really fortunate now that I was able to pull her out and homeschool her for a little bit, and now that we're in the school that I teach at now, that all the children receive Orton-Gillingham structured literacy in the early grades, and that we have a support team for children who need more in the intermediate grades and into middle school too.
That's incredible. That's an incredible school
Mhm.
that you're in and a great
Yeah.
support system for her. Now, if we
Mhm.
could circle back around, you mentioned dyslexia and dysgraphia. So those are two
Yes.
separate learning disabilities.
Yes, they
And I
are.
would love for you to kind of briefly explain each one so that listeners know what these learning disabilities are and maybe potential red flags that they could be looking for.
Sure. So definitely you can spot signs of dyslexia in preschoolers, and definitely it can be diagnosed by kindergarten. By this time in kindergarten, I could tell you which students I'm working with who I think are dyslexic, and I think we could get them a dyslexia diagnosis. Um, But parents of preschoolers, parents who find you and who find you on social media or find your blog and who are going through your program, if they have a child who they're working on with the alphabet and we're having persistent problems with letter names or letter sounds at 4 years old, coupled with like speech problems, or if one parent or their partner has a history of reading or spelling difficulties too, those are some of the really early signs that we see. And by kindergarten, first, second grade, if we are still having trouble with letter sounds, having trouble with fluently decoding words, getting sounds mixed up, missing that final sound in words consistently, or really Sally Shaywitz, who wrote the book Overcoming Dyslexia, said if a child is not leaving first grade a fluent reader, that's a really big sign of dyslexia, where I would encourage parents to get a professional diagnosis. Now, dysgraphia is different. Dysgraphia can co-occur with dyslexia, but dysgraphia is more it's a writing disability. And there's kind of a couple different flavors of dyslexia. There's the kind that's just motor dyslexia, or I'm sorry, motor dysgraphia, where children are having a hard time with just the letter formation. My son, my middle child, has yet to be diagnosed, but we know that's what he is going to eventually be diagnosed with because he has no dyslexia signs. But just getting those letters on paper, having the letters be on the line, and having words be in an orderly, across the line, just a horizontal line instead of sliding down the page. Those are some of the signs we see of just motor dysgraphia. But there's more a phonological part of dysgraphia too for some children, where it co-occurs with dyslexia, where the spelling part is just really, really, really a challenge in getting the words down on paper. Like they might be able to say the sentence, but then there's a breaking point between the brain and then getting that down. So that's the kind of the big overview of dysgraphia. And some of the signs that I would encourage parents to look for are just persistent problems in handwriting that's completely illegible. You've practiced and you just don't see your child making progress. Also, a persistent problem with pencil grip. If you've tried the putting the coin through the slot and all the other Play-Doh, all the other good fine motor activities, and you're still seeing persistent problems, I would be looking at dysgraphia.
Well, I love that you brought up that dysgraphia is not just the messy handwriting. Like you said, there's
Mhm.
that version, but that it could also be just really having a hard time getting the words out on the paper. And in
Yeah.
fact, I was just thinking of a kindergarten student that I've worked with this year who has beautiful handwriting, but she
Mhm.
really struggles with spelling and she really struggles getting all of those sounds out on the paper. And she doesn't struggle in the same way with reading, a little bit, but not
Mhm.
as much. And so and also is just very verbal and very confident,
Yeah.
and there are just signs that something's not processing correctly, something's
Right.
not clicking, and I think it's really important for parents to know that it's not just,
Mhm.
like you said, messy handwriting. And then circling back to dyslexia, I noticed you never mentioned reversals of letters. Like most
No,
people
yeah.
assume if a child
Yeah.
reverses a letter, that does not mean that they are dyslexic. In
Nope.
fact, it's normal for kids to reverse
Yeah.
their letters, and so I love that you didn't even bring that up as something to look for.
Yeah. No, no. Our most kindergartners still at this point of the year confusing B and D. Yeah, a lot of them are, like, both for sound and for writing, both for decoding and for writing. So, yeah, I would only look at reversals by the time it comes into second grade as an additional thing with a list of other signs of dyslexia.
Yes, so
But yeah,
students
that
can
is
have
like the most common misconception, even in some of the autism parent groups I'm in. Parents will say, "Oh, it can't be dyslexia because they're not reversing," and I have to explain, "Well, that's not what it's about. It's about hearing the sounds."
exactly, totally different. Yes,
Mhm,
absolutely. And what I really appreciate about what the information that you bring
mhm.
online about dyslexia and dysgraphia is you talk about the early intervention, how important it
Yep,
is, and that one
yeah,
of the reasons we work with preschoolers and kindergartners on letters and sounds is because we are looking for those red flags. Like Sally
yep,
Shaywitz says, if you're leaving first grade and you're not fluently reading, that's a sign. And what
yeah,
I see in Facebook groups and online is
mhm,
parents saying, it's fine if your child's not reading till they're 7 or 8. It's fine if they're not interested. They're going to catch up. don't worry about it, especially I see in homeschool communities where
Yeah.
I think they're trying to take the pressure off and say, don't pressure your
Mhm.
child, they can go at their own pace. So, what would you say to parents who are reading that kind of information online?
Oh, I would say I have so many things to say, but the main thing that I feel is important to understand about struggling readers is that the longer we delay getting them help, the longer it's going to take for them to become a successful reader. And the longer they feel like they are a poor reader, the more it's going to impact their mental health. So, why am I really talking about literacy? I'm talking about literacy because of mental and physical health. And illiteracy, low literacy, are associated with so many terrible outcomes. Children who don't get the help they need for learning their learning disabilities are more at risk for bad mental health outcomes, addiction, all sorts of terrible things. So the reason I think it's so important that we catch these things early is because it's going to be a smaller gap for parents to close, and the child just isn't going to have time to fall behind. And then to your point about homeschooling parents, it's the same with just all children. We want children to eventually go from learning to read to reading to learn. It's always kind of a dance between those two things. We're always still learning to read, even in the intermediate grades in school. But the longer it takes them to be able to access more content through the written word, more vocabulary, just more knowledge in general, it doesn't just impact their ability to read and write, but it impacts their ability to learn across the board in school. And I think that's the big concern with homeschool parents. I mean, they definitely have the time, a little bit more time and a little bit more flexibility, but you still want your child to be able to access as much information as they can through the written word.
Yes, unlocking the world of literacy for them. I absolutely love that I did that for my son and
Mhm.
early, considered early, I guess some people would say,
Yeah.
but he is now able to read on his own and unlock this information for himself. And what a gift. What a gift that I've been able to give
Mhm.
him. And to your
Mhm.
point about mental health and the confidence that our kids feel or don't feel if they're not
Right.
great readers, they remember that. In
Yeah.
fact, my husband, who has a diagnosed learning disability, remembers how hard it was to
Mhm.
struggle in
Mhm.
school. And although is very successful now, he'll never forget. He'll never
Yeah.
forget those feelings. And for us to know that that could happen to our kids, I can't let that happen. I can't let that happen to my kids or anybody else's kids. I would like
No.
parents to know that this is so important for that confidence piece. We don't want them to have
Yeah.
that experience.
Yeah, and it's preventable for I
Yes.
mean, the learning disability itself isn't preventable. If that's the way your child's brain is wired, then that's what it's going to be. But that feeling of failure or that huge gap that then needs to be closed, that is preventable. I work with a first grade student now who I started with last year, and the student was recently diagnosed dyslexic, and this we just have never had. She's never had to deal with low self esteem because we just got on top of it right away, and the little bit, the seeing me one time a week. But what's really made the difference is the parents practicing the 5 or 10 minutes at night at home, which of course it's hard for parents to believe that, but getting your program doing that a little bit, it really makes a huge difference in helping kids not to experience this deep sense of failure that then they, kind of generalize what that means about themselves or their character.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, the importance of parents. That is one of my
Yeah.
main missions
Yeah.
is to empower
Hmm.
parents to work with their kids at home. And I know you share that as well. You share
Yeah.
games and activities that they can do because
Mhm.
like you said, that's the difference. If they see us as tutors once or twice a week, we can do what we can in that time, but it's not enough. We need
It's
that
really
parent
not enough.
support.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, really, I do see some students twice a week, but the ones I see once a week who then have a parent who practice with them 5 or 10 minutes, most of the other days, not the all the other days, but most of the other days, they're the ones who are really making the most success.
Yes. So let's talk about a parent who has a little preschooler and they want to set them up
Mhm.
for success. They want to make sure that they are on the right track. What would you suggest are the most important skills that they work on even before they head into kindergarten?
So I'm actually doing this with my son Patrick right now, who just turned 4. And I mean, you and I are in complete agreement about this, that it's like letter names and letter sounds. I believe, do you do names and sounds at the same time or do you do sounds first?
Names and sounds at the same time.
Yeah, and there's so much argument about that on the internet. I really don't personally feel like you could go wrong with any one of those. Do names, do sounds, or names and sounds. Just commit, do one of them. I mean, they're all important, but do one of them with your preschool child. I did with my son Patrick. I think I mostly did names and sounds together too. But then with a 4-year-old after that, I would do oral blending and personally with my own son Patrick, we've gone through most of the alphabet sounds before I started doing oral blending, and we're to the point where he can start blending words. So if your child's able to get to that point and you're able to have written letters and have them blend those written letters into words, that's what I would recommend. But the bare minimum that I would recommend is letter names for parents. And the reason I harp on that is because parents feel confident about letter names. So I think like what is going to be most accessible to the average parent? Um, Letter names are just all around us. It's on Sesame Street. It's on any game you see at Target. Do the letter names. If you can do the letter sounds, there's so many great people online who will help you teach your child the letter sounds. Go for that too. But definitely letter names because that's accessible and you can see right away if your child is struggling with that. Then that helps the parent know, okay, we got to keep working on this, but maybe there's something else going on that we need to look for.
Yeah, just approach it with curiosity. Wow, we've been working on
Mhm,
this for weeks and weeks and they're still not
mhm.
getting it. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I wonder what's going on. Yes,
yeah.
I love that accessibility. Letter names and sounds, the oral blending. And your
Mhm.
child does not need to enter kindergarten reading chapter books. If they do, that's
Nope.
great. It's
Great.
not going
Yeah,
to harm them.
not at
Is
all.
some chatter online that if you teach a child to read too young, they're going to end up hating reading and they're going to rebel. I have never seen that. I have only ever
Me
seen
neither.
kids
Me neither.
enter school
Yeah,
who love
yeah,
reading and then they feel
yeah,
confident. So don't
yeah,
worry about that.
yeah. No, 100% in agreement. And that, I actually, in the groups that I teach, all kindergartners at our school get Orton-Gillingham. And I actually have this year also the highest group of readers, kids who can read chapter books. And it has not done them any harm. And they still have a ton to learn. They still need to learn handwriting. They still need to learn spelling. They still need to learn to use a capital letter and end with a period. And they still need to learn to use a space in between words. So they are not bored by any stretch. And we are able to, the regular classroom teacher and me are able to differentiate for them to make sure that they are getting what they need to move them forward, even if they came in already reading words.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you differentiate for them. And as a reminder, your child is not in reading class all day long in kindergarten. So if they come in reading, they still have math, they have writing, they have science and social studies and art and
Hmm.
all sorts of fun things. So
Yep.
don't think your child is going to be bored just because they can read. Thank you for
Yes.
that reminder.
Exactly. Hmm. Hmm.
Now, as an advocate of early literacy and
Hmm.
especially struggling readers, you have a very active Instagram account. I'd love
Hmm.
everyone to go check it out at Printable Parents. You also have an account at Printable Teachers. So, teachers, you can check her out over
Yep.
there. But at the Printable Parents account, you have some great reels. And one of them I'm remembering was about how the inadequacy of just reading to your child every night, that's not going to teach them how to read. And you compared it to getting your driver's license. Will
Right.
you tell us a little bit about that reel and a little bit about that myth around just reading to your child?
Yeah, so this is really hurtful to parents of children with struggling reader. This assumption that if we were just reading to our child or reading more to our child, that they wouldn't struggle. And my husband and I, like, Molly was our first child. We read every night, every day. I stayed home with her for several years. She got plenty of exposure. So just reading to your child and that advice that teachers give parents is hurtful and harmful because it doesn't give it's harmful because it doesn't give parents something that's really actionable to move the needle, and it's hurtful because it's the assumption that we haven't appreciated appreciated the importance of reading with our child. But yeah, it's just reading is a skill like learning to drive a car is a skill, and we can actually explicitly teach it step by step, just like we're like, here we go, we're gonna put our this is this pedal, this is the brake, this is the gas, this is what you do with it. Hey, these are the letters, these are the sounds that they're spelling. We can blend them like this. So that reel was poking fun at the fact that a lot of people think you can just pick it up, and showing that it's not. It's a skill that we can be taught, be explicitly taught, just like driving a car. There's probably some people would say, well, driving a car puts other people at risk. But again, not teaching children to read also puts them at risk in a lot of significant ways.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And you've had some
Mhm.
reels go viral and attract
Mhm.
some attention. We know when reels go
Yep.
viral, the trolls will come
Yeah.
out. I do
Yep.
appreciate how you always respond back to those comments. You're very level headed. You explain the research and you share your perspective from your point of view. But
Yeah.
where do you think that negativity comes from? Where do you think that, especially when it's coming from people pushing back on teaching the alphabet early, focusing on letters and sounds, and they get very aggressive with you about how negative that is. Why do you think that is?
I actually think we are all probably want the same thing. We probably all want happy, healthy children who love reading. And what we see across the society right now is this huge polarization and really digging in our heels. So it goes beyond that. It goes into adults having a really difficult time listening to each other and being able to take into consideration a different viewpoint that might challenge our current viewpoint. So I think that that's really where the social media stuff comes from, is this polarization that we're seeing just across society, and people, like, again, just digging in instead of taking the perspective of somebody else. So I think it has a lot more to do with, insecurity of adults rather than, actual harm to children, because as we know, teaching your child to read younger is not going to harm them at all. It's only going to help them. So yeah, and I do really think we all have the same goal. We want children to be successful, and some people idealize, some European countries that have different resources for schools, different resources for parents. So it just creates completely different environments. The language is a different structure than English is too, and they generalize the success there to the United States when it's really comparing apples and oranges in a lot of different ways. So I think we want the same thing. We would love this idyllic picture of children just cozied up in a corner, learning to read books, learning to read just by being exposed to it. But some of us have had the reality, like me, this hard reality that that's really just not going to help a lot of children, and other people aren't there yet.
That's true. And everyone looks at it through their own lens, right? So I see people will
Yep.
comment, I learned to read and it was fine.
Mhm.
I never did this and I was fine.
Yeah.
My child didn't learn until they were 8 and now they're great. So everybody's looking at just their own perspective. And
Right.
you, as a teacher, have the perspective knowing from your professional background. And then also you have a personal perspective. And it's just a
Yeah.
good reminder. It also reminds me of when people online, when they say that, it's like, well, when I was younger, my stepdad had a truck with a camper shell on it, and we sat in the back of
Right.
that truck and drove hours and hours to go camping. No seatbelts. We were
Right.
all packed in the back there. I don't think anybody is doing that nowadays. And so just because it used to be done back in the
Right.
day and we all survived doesn't mean it's what's best for kids and doesn't mean that's what we should be doing now in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're talking about is like survivorship bias, and
Yes.
it's the same kind of thing with reading. It's a different type of survivorship. My child survived being taught how to read this way, so we're just gonna kind of extrapolate it to the whole community, and we can't do that. Just like we can't say, well, I was okay riding in the camper, but what about these, 20,000 children who died in terrible preventable car accidents because they weren't wearing seatbelts in the front of the cab, where their lives could have been spared.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you for putting a name to that survivorship bias.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Now, you mentioned at the very beginning of this episode that you learned balanced literacy when you were in
Mhm.
school. And now
Yep.
we're moving more toward a structured literacy approach. So we see this positive shift happening in schools. And if anybody wants to know more information about that, check out the podcast Sold a Story. It will explain the whole
Yep.
background. But I was just
Mhm.
curious, you see this shift moving forward. Do you see it making a difference? Do you think that there's still room for schools to grow? Do you think that there's still something missing in our school system with
Mhm.
reading education?
Oh, yeah, I personally just don't think it's moving fast enough. I think we have no choice but to have it move because the evidence is just so great, and legislatures are starting to do something about it. So I think that schools of education are going to have to catch up. And I put a lot of the blame on schools of education, because I think if teachers had this foundational knowledge, then they would be able to use their curriculum better. or make better instructional decisions. So yeah, I do think it will change. I just don't think it's changing fast enough for this current generation of children. And that's why you and I are both on social media, because this is where we can advocate and make a real difference in the lives of real children right now. Why we're waiting for schools of education and school districts to catch up.
Totally, totally agree with you. And speaking of how you're making a difference, I would love for you to talk about some of the offerings that you have through Printable Parents and how you support parents online.
So you can find me on Instagram at Printable Parents or my website, which is printableparents.com. And the ways that I have a couple different ways that I support parents right now. The main one is through my program Sound School, where I help parents of struggling readers. Kind of become their reading 911, as well as teaching them about the 44 sounds in English and all the ways that you can spell them. Because I start with this foundational learning for parents that we never got in school so that they can better understand the language, so that then when they are teaching their child to sound out, they have the information they need to help their child be successful with that. So that's my main program, and I offer support with that along the way too. So I can, when there's a reading emergency, I can help a parent problem solve that. And then I have a ton of like lower cost printable products that help parents. My favorite one right now is my Phonics Fun big bundle of games, where it takes you through a complete sequence from sounds to 3-syllable words. And it's a way to kind of trick your child, not really trick, but it's a way to break up the negativity with your child, where your child will get so engaged in playing these like strategy based games that they will want to keep practicing and practicing. So those are a few of the things that I offer. But mostly the main thing I want to offer to parents, and I do this for free, is my empathy, because I know what it feels like to be a parent of a struggling reader. And I just want anybody who's listening who feels hopeless to know there is hope, and there's lots of people who are willing to help you.
Yes, and Molly is such a success story. You've seen
Hmm.
what happens when you get the right intervention, and now she's doing wonderfully.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'm going to link all of that down below so everyone can get in touch with you. And before we go, since this is the Littles Love Learning podcast, I would love to know
Mhm.
what you love most about working with littles.
Ooh, it is like my favorite thing right now about working with kindergartners is really when we are starting to read words and sentences, and when they feel like that pride you can see in their little face when they're like, I can finally do this, because they all do want to read. And that feeling of success, it's not just the light bulb moments, but it's more those moments where they experience like resilience, where they see they have the grit and they can keep going and they can achieve something. That's my favorite part.
I mean, what a great example for them. Because we do tell
Yeah.
kids learning to read is hard. We're not going to sugarcoat
Yeah.
it and we're not
Mhm.
going to gaslight them and say this is easy. It's tough.
Nope.
So when they do
Yeah.
it, oh my gosh, that pride they have, it is so cool
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Well,
agree.
Anne, this has been so much fun. You are such a light on Instagram. I'm so thankful to have connected with you. And I hope all the listeners will go and check out all of your offerings and see how you can support them, especially if you're listening and your child is struggling with reading or you suspect that they have a learning disability. Please reach out to Anne because she's a great support for that.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin.